Hey folks, here we are again. This is Jaime Alejandro, and I'd like to welcome you to the Arts Calling podcast, where I interview independent creatives, hardworking folks in the literary, visual, and performing arts. I have a wonderful conversation lined up today, but first, let me just air a couple of things. I just want to remind you, if you want to share your thoughts on the latest episodes, what you like or didn't like, any thoughts or suggestions, let me know over at artscallingpodcast@gmail.com. That is the new email for the podcast. And if you could do me a big favor, be sure to stop by coalitionfordigitalnarratives.org. That is my creative home on the internet, where I'm going to be starting to share a bit more on the creative process, my own works, and of course, the Coalition Works literary journal, which has been going since last year. We are about to celebrate our 1-year anniversary in the fall, so I'm very excited to have you check that out. So that would be great. And before I talk about my guest, my awesome guest, let me do a quick shout out. And this week, I'd like to tell you about My Bad Poetry podcast. This is a show that I've been listening to for the last couple of years. It's been on my regular rotation, thanks to the Twitter writing community. Aaron and Dave, who produce the show, are friends of the show. And let me share a little bit about how they do their thing. Aaron and Dave dive into an old private journal to read poems written in high school. Along the way, the two have found themselves joined by some incredibly amazing people, all willing to share some of their own bad poetry. Experience a mix of self-reflection, humor, self-deprecation, great conversations, and just maybe a half-decent poem. So there you have it, folks. Check out My Bad Poetry podcast. Aaron and Dave, you're doing amazing work. I look forward to the episodes every time they come out, and I hope that you, dear listener, go and check them out as soon as possible. Now let's talk about our main event, our returning guest, Jim Clayton. DownBeat Magazine called Jim Clayton's music warm, happy, and soulful. He calls it a blend of bebop and New Orleans, the city he considers a second home. His repertoire is a mix of jazz standards, reimagined pop classics, and his own memorable writing. Jim's last 2 albums, Lenny Jumps In and Songs My Daughter Knows, landed on the jazz radio charts in both Canada and the USA. He won 3 national awards with the recording act, the Clayton Scott Group, and his music has been heard internationally on radio, in film, and on television, including Dateline NBC, Keeping Up With The Kardashians, and MTV. Jim spent a decade as a music director with the acclaimed theater company The Second City, entertaining audiences around the globe, from expats in Asia to our troops in Bosnia. He began streaming nightly performances at the start of the pandemic. After over 750 online shows, Jim garnered 30,000 new online followers. And personally, I just want to add, Jim has a natural ability to connect with an audience. He's always insightful, a delightful storyteller, and he's been called Canada's very own Harry Connick Jr. He is down-to-earth, soulful, and joyous as his jazz performances. And these, I believe, are the trappings of an outstanding entertainer. And I'm very, very fortunate that I get to talk to him for a second time. We had a lovely conversation, and I hope you enjoy. His album, Lookout, is available October 3rd, so go to jimclaytonjazz.com to get that information, and let's give him a call. Hello. How about round 2?
Hey, can you hear me okay now?
Yes, I can. There we go. Hey, Jim. Good morning.
How are you?
Oh, I'm doing well. Thank you so much for coming back on and doing this. I'm really excited.
I'm flattered that you had me back.
Oh my goodness, how couldn't I? We had such a great time talking about music, and especially with the accompaniment. I think that was probably the most exciting, moment of Arts Calling. So it was really a pleasure.
I'll make sure to. I tell you what, I think I played you off last time.
You gonna work our way in?
So I'll. Yeah, get a drum roll of some sort. Ladies and gentlemen, Arts Calling. I thought about playing the Carson theme song, but you're younger than I am, so I imagine you're probably, and I don't know the Jay Leno one, so.
But I do understand the reference, so that is very, very exciting to me. And you made my morning, so thank you for doing that. But man, we have a lot to catch up on. I think you've been quite busy these last couple of months. I think it's almost been a year since we last spoke. So
I think we talked in January.
Oh yeah. So maybe 8 or 9 months there. How's it been?
Oh, I wasn't fact checking. I was just reminiscing.
When I start doing video, I could have the clicker come up at the bottom, to give me the corrections.
the little gauge,
the
factometer. Yeah, that was fun. I got some nice feedback from I was sharing that on my socials, as the kids call them, and
right.
I got some nice feedback. So I appreciate you doing that.
Oh, wonderful.
Actually, when I reached out to you, I was thinking about how much has changed just since January. But it sort of started with me getting it in my head to attend Jazz Ahead in Bremen, Germany, a conference last April. And that stemmed from pre-COVID, and possibly where I first got COVID, was a conference in New York City called Jazz Congress, which I don't think exists anymore. I think it got folded into some other organization, like a networking event with panels, and you go room to room and hear somebody talking about this, somebody talking about that. And I just had a fabulous time. It was the 2 previous Januaries. And I may have mentioned this last time I was on, but the first time I went to a few panels, and but the best part of the experience was just hanging out in the common area, but where the coffee is, and just saying hi to folks, and discovering that as much as I think of myself as a self-conscious person, and I probably am on some level, and maybe I'm fighting nature to do it, but I so enjoyed just introducing myself to people and then chatting with them, but more importantly, making a note of what's their industry, what are they into, and then going, oh, I just met this person that you have this in common with, and I found that I loved connecting people. My favorite part of it was not meeting. I liked meeting the people, but introducing them to each other. And I went back the following year, having made some contacts, one of whom got me my first gig as a piano player and vocalist in the States, as an entertainer and not just an accompanist or music director. And I went back the following year. I took my family. They went to see Beetlejuice on Broadway while I was at this thing, introducing everybody I could possibly meet. And because of the folks I met and getting that contact, to be able to perform in the States, and there's paperwork involved, so you need somebody to commit to booking you as a Canadian to bring you in. I thought, well, I went to a conference in the U.S. and I got a gig in the U.S. What if I went to Europe? And so, my wife thought that was a good, smart, reasonably good logic and a smart idea. And while I was in touch with them, telling them what I've been up to, which was the live stream, Jim's Piano Bar, and the press it got and whatnot, I wound up being invited to be on a panel at the event. So now I'm not just an attendee, but I'm actually being passed off as some sort of expert about something, which is dubious, but it was fun. And I also, as a result of that, wound up presenting an abbreviated version of a keynote presentation I've been working on since you and I first chatted. Life lessons from an accidental piano bar, and the stories of some of the interesting characters I met there, things I've met there, life lessons I learned from doing it, from engaging with having suddenly 30,000 people following you online. There's going to be all sorts of folks, all sorts of things to deal with. In a couple of occasions, people to block because they were threatening the life of somebody else that watches your show online.
Right.
It was interesting. But I realized I had something to share from that. And all of the stories are also related to somebody or something on that show that had, who who had a request or there was a song behind it. So the idea of the keynote is that each of the stories ends with connecting it to, here's the song, this is relevant to this song. And surprise, behind me on stage, I've got my bass player and my drummer. And I sit down at the piano, and each segment, 5 to 8 minutes, ends with me performing a song. So it's, and I talked to the keynote friends I'd made from doing corporate events over the years, and they were like, this could be new. This is distinct. This is different. So this might work. So I've been working on that, and did part of it in Bremen, Germany. So I get to say I premiered it in Germany, which is kind of cool, being from Toronto.
Yeah. And that's incredible to hear, because to me, as you mentioned this, it sounds almost like a one-man show, almost like life lessons. You are sharing it in such a way that it is a presentation, I imagine, but it seems to have those kinds of elements, or certain trappings of a one-man performance.
It's, are you familiar with Mike Birbiglia?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. He started off stand-up, and it sort of turned into, they're plays. They're one-man shows.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's probably hints of that. My slight level of discomfort with performing solo in that capacity, not like talking and not just being at the piano, is sort of offset by the fact that I actually have a rhythm section on stage, budget permitting. That didn't happen in Germany. I shared the story of the piano bar and then a couple of the segments from the keynote, and then that went over pretty well. And then I headed upstairs at the German conference, headed upstairs and joined two tech gurus for a panel, and one was a fellow who deals in NFTs, and I don't think he deals with crypto, but that's the same level of, it's over my head to the same degree. But so I had to cram a bit. And on the plane on the way over, I was reading up on how like Stone Temple Pilots created an NFT that had included, front row seats and some original artwork and some unique merch. And so, I had some point of something point of reference for what they were talking about. And this fellow had created these for and traveled with Dolly Parton. Like, these are some high level professionals.
Yeah.
And the other fellow is a great electronic musician named Jay, who I've stayed in touch with thanks to LinkedIn. And Jay is an AI guru. And was talking about things I had no idea were going on, such as, if you're on Spotify, you're not just competing with other musicians, you're competing with the fact that Spotify has got AI generating music to certain specifications, which means that there's more competition. But also, if somebody chooses easy listening jazz over your stuff, easy listening jazz, this playlist may have been created by AI owned by Spotify, and they don't have to pay anybody because there is nobody. And so there's nobody to pay. So they hang on to that aspect of that part of the money. And it was just, some of it was blowing my mind.
And I want to come back to this. Yeah. If I may, because I know it's kind of a heavy topic to get into right now, but I'd like to ask you what your thoughts on it, if there's any kind of fears or concerns about it, because it is so pervasive now. And we're seeing it in screenwriting, where they're saying that studios are generating original first drafts of content from AI. And then the idea is to hire screenwriters to do the touch-ups or to do the revisions. But the intellectual property is to remain with the studios. And it's sort of pervasive now. And I'm curious, in terms of music, you as a live performer, as a musician who is sharing something that is as organic and as human as music, what's your immediate response to that? How does that land with you?
I think a lot of musicians, especially my age or older, made the shift already, in that I'm trying to think of how to phrase this. Making the stuff to sell that ship sailed
Mm-hmm.
with Napster, LimeWire. If iTunes had started a little sooner, then younger folks might be accustomed to paying $1 for a song, or whatever they charge now, but they were already used to downloading it for free. I always had legal issues, concerns with it. Like, just because they can't enforce that the sign that at the library that says, please don't photocopy the books, it's against copyright law. It might be tough to enforce, but you still give it the old college try. And that never really seemed to happen with downloading. So, but c'est la vie. But we went from doing low paying gigs to sell CDs for $20 off the stage to doing the gigs, trying to make more money on the gig and giving away the music for free effectively to get people to come out. I'm not sure that answers the question very well, but we're already used to shifting gears to making the money somewhere else. And I think that somewhere else we wound up prioritizing the live performing over the recording. And I think the recording stuff is more, and the songwriting is more vulnerable to AI, but AI, until they come up with a legit hologram and not just projecting a picture onto a Mylar screen, which is what they seem to call holograms on tour. I think the live performing is safe from that, and live performing is honestly where it's at income wise. I mean, that's I think proven just by the fact that somebody like Boz Scaggs or I don't know why he's the one that always comes to mind, but the fellow from the 70s, greatest hit, like the guys that were retired and probably thought they were going to stay retired because of their greatest hits package, still selling all these years later. Well, all of a sudden the 2000s comes and people get it for free off the internet, and it's like your pension went away. And now you see guys that, I thought they were retired, but they're playing this casino tour. I think that is because of the royalties just bottoming out. So musicians have had to find ways to work around things. I think movies and television stayed, I think that happened ahead of movies and televisions, movie and television being hit by downloading simply because of internet bandwidth. You could download a song, it's 3 megs. You want to download a movie, even with current compression, I think an hour TV show is probably minimum like around half a gig. If it's decent quality, movies twice that probably. That's really dealing with downloading though. With AI, I did the one that really I hadn't thought about the script writing and then having it it is going to churn out maybe a decent premise if you get enough information into it, but somebody's going to need to clean it up and make the dialogue so it doesn't sound like, the first Luke, the episodes 1, 2, and 3 from Star Wars. Somebody's going to have to do it the way you've always had people come in and punch it up. The guys that aren't named on it, but Carrie Fisher was a famous script doctor. Kevin Smith does it still, I think. Mamet. Someone's going to have to do that. But yeah, you're right. If the AI, studio-owned AI came up with the original premise, that's going to save them a bundle, because the script doctors probably only cost 1% of what I'm guessing, but a small percentage of what the actual script creator cost. And if there's no creator, there's nobody to pay. The one that got me was the idea that extras could be paid for one movie or maybe one day, get scanned, physically scanned, and then used not just for other days on that shoot, but in perpetuity by the studio.
That's horrific.
And I can't wrap my head around who thought that was going to withstand scrutiny.
Yeah, and I mean, it's one of those efforts where they go, let's see how far we can push it, and then we'll tread back. But at the same time, I love this idea in terms of your musician perspective that you can't let it paralyze you. You can't let it stop you from going out there and doing the work of a musician, where I think maybe in popular times, and I would say since the advent of recorded technology, we've conflated a musician's worth with their recordings. And it almost seems like you're taking it back to, we're here to perform. We're here to give people an emotional experience in person. And that seems to be sort of like the most human thing that you could do right now. And it's really inspiring because, like, as performers or whatever it is that you're sharing, the technology still can't replicate that. And even a recording is just an artifact to slightly represent what you actually have to share, which is the performance. That's the big gift. And I think that we maybe catastrophize without realizing that performance is never going to go away. And sharing that emotional experience is never going to go away. But I think you're clued on that, yeah.
Yeah, two things can be true. It is a catastrophe, but like it is at the same time. It is what it is. It is a catastrophe, but what are you going to do? Technology changes. I mean, I'm a musician and I can't sell CDs for $20 on the stage anymore. Mind you, I'm in jazz and the demographic skews a bit older and those people still have CD players, a lot of them. So, but the youngsters, not so much.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, we're not, the performing is a very, very different thing. I know this because I'm very happy performing and I can be a nervous wreck in the recording studio. It's part of performing. Part of the weirdness of it is that it's a momentary thing. It's you play the tune and then it's gone into the ether. If you record it, it's there forever, which sounds more attractive at a glance. Except that, what if you make a mistake? The mistake's there forever, and that's why the recording makes me far more nervous than performing.
Yeah.
I still, and I've been singing not nearly as long as I've been playing, and I'm perfectly happy to listen back to my playing. But it's the sound of a piano and it's a little less personal than hearing your own voice. And I heard with the new album, just the other day, I heard myself singing on the radio for the first time on a Toronto show that aired they asked permission to air one of the tunes before its release date. And I said, yeah, sure. Absolutely. And I didn't expect to be as uncomfortable as I was. It was very, very strange. It felt very exposed.
Yeah. And before you keep going, I just want to give you a shout out on that because the new album called Lookout is phenomenal. Had a chance to listen to it a couple of times. I had such a blast with it. And it is sort of a trademark joy that you bring to the recording. And I have so many questions about improvising and that sort of discomfort, and how the preparation went into it. But if we could talk about your voice, because this is the first album that you did that features your vocals, and it was great to have there. It was great to have it be a part of it. But obviously that hesitation that you may have experienced is not one that I think is an issue because you sounded wonderful in it. But tell me about...
Oh, I appreciate that.
Yeah. Tell me about preparing for sitting down in the studio and sharing those vocals, because that seems to be like the big barrier that you had to overcome in this record.
Yeah. Well, to be honest, we may have touched on this last time, but I was a kid with a speech impediment. I was in speech therapy for 10 years. Didn't say the letter S properly consistently until like grade 7. And so when I wound up working briefly in radio before I moved to Toronto to pursue music with my radio boss's encouragement, which either meant he really liked my music or he really disliked my work in radio. I thought that was the brass ring. I thought, wow, I went from not being able to talk to being paid to talk. So let's call it a day. Like let's quit while we're ahead. So the idea of singing just seemed like I was just pushing my luck. And I did do one gig when I was 18 at a local tavern in Sarnia, and the guy hired me without hearing me. And it was rough. It was not well attended. It was my retention of people who came in, sat down, listened, and then stayed. The ratio was heavily skewed towards leaving before your drinks even came. Yeah, it was not a good idea. I don't know where I got the audacity to think I could just learn to sing in like the 3 weeks I had between getting hired and doing the gig. So and even my own mom, honestly, I went home, practiced a tune a couple of times to practice. And back then the idea of practicing was like doing a tune maybe twice. And then, hey, Mom, come listen to this. And it was Barry Manilow's I Made It Through the Rain from the early 80s, maybe 1980. And a shout out to my Barry Manilow fan friends out there. And even my own mom listened to about half of it and said, oh, maybe you should focus on the piano. So, and this is a woman who went on to become a grief counselor, a chaplain, consoling people who were terminally ill in the hospital. And she couldn't even bring it to say to her own son, hey, maybe with a little work. So yeah, I went about 30 years without singing again. And then I got the bug when I was about to turn 50. I just turned 56. So it was a very, very gradual process. And I went into it telling my wife, don't blow any smoke up my behind about this. Like, I need to know if you say this is good enough now for me to do at one of my gigs at a club, that it really is, that I'm not going to walk out and people are going to go, oh, what's he doing? Why is he, who gave him a mic? And she said, no, I'll do that. And holy cow, she did. I started off just performing like I was anyhow at seniors' homes with friends. And I got up the nerve to do every other song for one 45-minute set. And I remember it very well because it's the place in the neighborhood. And my daughter and I, Lenny, would go to visit people when she was young, and, because they love babies. And I looked at my bass player friend, Peter, afterwards, and I said, well, at the seniors' home, I said, well, nobody walked out. And he looked at me and he said, well, to be fair, most of them couldn't. So bless my friends for keeping me honest. He's just very funny. And I would tape these seniors' home performances because they're lovely, appreciative audiences, and it's a little bit captive, I guess. So I would, do a few tunes in the middle of a set, and I would find like 4 bars to play for my wife. That didn't make me completely like embarrassed. I'd be like, is this okay? Like, how's this? And she'd listen and she, sort of like, frown at this note or that note. And she'd be like, well, if you do work on this and do, and she sings beautifully. And so she knows. And the biggest compliment I think I ever got, the happiest I've ever been with feedback, was when I brought something home from one of those and I played her maybe 8 bars of a Duke Ellington tune or something I was singing. And she sat there and listened to it and then looked up, paused, and then she said, nothing about that made me cringe. And that was like getting a Grammy award. It's like, for me, it's all from where you start. Everything's relative. And I was just delighted. And the more I loosened up and the more I relaxed about it, the better it got. And I quickly found out that, not quickly, a couple of years, but I found out eventually that it was as much about, it was probably 40% technique and 60% just relaxing. Because at one point she said, it sounds bad, it's that you sound nervous. And if you're nervous, the audience is going to be nervous.
Right.
And then once I got that through my head, it took some time. And then doing the live streaming, when people would say, hey, can you play this? Can you do this tune? And I would play it, and in the comments in the chat, they'd be like, oh, I was hoping you would sing it. And hearing somebody go that had heard me sing say, oh, I was hoping you would sing some more, made me go, really? All right. So, I would do it. It was it took a while. It took a while. And then coming out of COVID, getting a weekly gig at a club in Toronto and showing up, not certain if they wanted me to just play, or because it was during the dinner shift, it was the early shift, but it was every week. It wasn't until I got there and the manager said, oh, let me go get your mic, that I was like, oh, okay, they do want me to sing. And then doing that every week and having people who actually knew something about jazz and other musicians, sometimes saying some nice things. It was about 8 months of that weekly gig, and after about the halfway point, that's when it really started to be fun. And not just, oh, here's a useful tool in my belt as a piano player. Now I can also sing. I was looking forward to it. And now it's just fun.
Oh, and you can tell, and that's one of the things I wanted to commend you on for the album. You feel relaxed. I think that is something that definitely comes through on Lookout. But if we could talk about coming together to bring this album to life. You brought on some collaborators on this. In the cover, you say it features Herlin Riley and Amina Scott.
Yeah.
Could you share a bit about your collaborators on this and how you brought the team together? What was that collaborative process like in the studio?
Well, you may find this entertaining to know then that I didn't meet them in person until that morning at the studio. Which is true, but that's not.
That seems like a very jazz thing, doesn't it? Like
jazz musicians are going, yeah. So what? That's normal. Like, but let me take it back to the way it came together was, and I'll take it back to that conference in Germany. I made a bunch of contacts. I had folks that I was meeting saying, hey, if you can get here to Sweden, or Finland, I don't know, it doesn't matter, but Finland specifically, I met a fellow from Music Finland who we bonded over the fact that we both loved Southern fried rock, like 38 Special from the 80s. And he's from Finland and he's into this stuff. And he also was into the Toronto band, The Pursuit of Happiness, which just shocked me because I didn't realize they were known overseas. And also the bass player from that band is now, for years, has been the music director at Toronto's jazz station. So he was delighted by that. But in other places, some folks that have connections in Brazil, they're like, hey, if you can get here, we'll help you get some gigs. And I was overwhelmed once I start looking into how to make that happen. And I talked to a friend, Celine. And Celine's a family friend and is also a artist representative. And she had somebody leave the roster and said, well, I could, actually, I could take you on if you're interested. But there's one condition. And the condition was that I make an album ASAP that has vocals on it, because I have 6 previous albums and they're all instrumental, because the most recent one was 2016 and I didn't take up singing until 2017. So, there you go. And it also, right previous to going to the conference, I realized, if I'm going to go to this conference, I need, for networking purposes, you want to have current promotional material. So I gone in the studio with a couple of friends and done like a 5-song demo. Another friend who is a fabulous videographer, works on the Star Trek television series, came over and shot video of me performing the tunes. So I had that for a demo, but I didn't have an album that she could, push to clubs and say, here's a video, but he's got a new album coming out, book him. And so, new album, well, what do I do? And I had conversations with a friend named Chris Bookshire, who is a world-class trombonist. He was from Winnipeg in Canada, moved to Toronto, was where I met him. Dual citizen, so we ended up in New Orleans, the home of jazz. And among other things, had set up a recording studio, and quite a nice one in the front half of his home. And he's like, he had mentioned, you should record down here. And so I'm like, well, let's do this then. But who with? Because I could use, if they're available, the same musicians as the 2013 instrumental album I did, Songs My Daughter Knows, which is recorded down there. And he's like, well, let me look into it. And he winds up saying, how about these folks? And I knew of Amina because Chris had spoken very highly of her, playing with her in the New Orleans Jazz Orchestra. And Herlin Riley, that's a whole nother thing, because I got into jazz partly, certainly standards, because of the movie When Harry Met Sally from 1980, I want to say 1987. And there was I want to say young guy, we're the same age actually, Harry Connick Jr. did a lot of the new music for When Harry Met Sally. And so I loved it and went out and got Harry's previous 2 albums. And Herlin's on the first one. This guy, I'm in the studio with a guy who plays on one of the albums that made me love jazz. And so I was wondering if I was going to freak out a little bit looking across the room, and here he is in the drum room. But he's just so nice. It's just so chill. Also, we were both wearing like flat caps, so we bonded over that. And then Amina was just absolutely lovely, and they're creatively contributing, like suggesting different feels, different tempos, for what about this groove? What if we did this on this tune? And it went super smoothly because I had charts, I had sheet music with all the details for, they're not it's not like I'm not doing the most common tunes as you've seen on the album. A lot of them aren't from the jazz lexicon. They're not jazz standards. So it wasn't like, hey, let's do this Gershwin tune that we all know, but let's do it at this tempo. Okay. And we'll do this ending. And then you just talk through it, maybe play the ending once and then knock it out and like do the tune. It wasn't that sort of thing. It was sheet music. Here's how long we play this part. Here's how we end. And I had created all this sheet music. I have their software for doing it, and I've been using it for 20 years, so it's not too hard. But I had my Toronto buddies come over and sit down with me and play through all the sheet music so that it was all proofread, because there's always like, oh, you forgot the repeat symbol on this sheet music. So that bass player would have wound up in a different part of the song. We'd already done that, made all the corrections, and I am grateful to them for that, because it meant that the first two tries at playing the song in New Orleans weren't just fixing the sheet music like might have happened. And so we wound up the rhythm section, we got everything done in one day. We were there from about 10 until I think we were packing up by 6:00.
It's beautiful. Yeah.
It's incredibly productive. That's an incredibly productive day. And then I was back the next day fixing the odd thing, and we started mixing. And but they're just absolutely lovely people. And if you're gonna, I think it's not a lot of people get to that level of their profession without being easy to get along with, supportive, and just, doing a great job. So
right. And I'm curious of the counterbalance here between the planning and the improvisation. If we could kind of dig into that just a little bit more. What do you look for in terms of that? Is it a feeling? Is it something that you feel will elevate the song, or what kind of emotional things are you looking for when somebody's bringing you things to try out in the recording?
For this style of album, the songs are pretty arranged. You don't want to leave too much to chance outside of this of the solos. With a different album, a different album might be very different, and a different group, a different band leader might operate very differently. I know there's guys that go in and like, hey, let's try this tune and see what happens. Keith Jarrett, the great piano player, has a trio, his Standards trio, with Jack DeJohnette and Gary Peacock, I believe. Yeah, that's right. They don't have a set list when they play live. Keith just starts playing a tune. Wow. And so most tunes start with just the piano. And maybe there's some where he's like, hey, you start the next one, and Gary starts the tune with bass. Live, I'm much more inclined to do that live. And that's with standards, and the guys just all know them, and they have a huge vocabulary of songs at their fingertips, literally. And with this, it was very much, here's we're going to play, here's the intro, and we're going to do this, and we're going to do that, and then we're going to solo, and here's who's going to solo. So even like that's not. And maybe I'm showing how the sausage is made here a bit, but it doesn't sound that magical. But when the solo happens, it's all yours. You've got this long, you've got this much time, this many bars, but it's all yours. Do what you want. I am not dictating to anybody what to do, and I'm in no position to, because I really only play the piano, I sing a bit, I play a bit of vibes, but not on this album. And I wouldn't know how to tell a bass player to approach playing the bass on anything. So and when the folks are this good, I'm going to be delighted. It might be, hey, on the second take, what if we took this other approach? But it would be in vague terms, because I don't have the terminology for their instruments. But I think most of the stuff on the album, the solos you're hearing from these folks, is whatever happened on the first go, and maybe the second go, just because we did it twice for fun, and they liked, wherever possible, I was letting them choose which version they thought was best.
Yeah, and I thought that was really well done. One of the standouts for me was a song from MASH, because it had I mean, the whole album is kind of like this, and maybe as an untrained listener, I'm enjoying how free it feels, and so I think that's just a compliment to the record because it was very well done in that sense. Even though it was arranged, there was a feeling of freedom, of levity there. But just as an example, I mean the drum solo in Song from Ash, or it was kind of a solo there near the end, and I was like, these guys are just cutting loose. That's really the energy that needed, to happen in that moment.
That's the phrase I would use too. And that's Herlin was had kind things to say when I was noodling, warming up to do the tune. But you probably noticed that it starts with just me, and that's not how I went into the studio planning to do it. It was going to be like 2, 3, 4, boom, we all come in. But I had this, left hand groove that I liked. It was. Is that too loud, or is that okay?
No, you're fine.
Yeah. The chord changes for the intro were almost like Moon Dance, but I was doing. Oh, there it is. And he's, tuning stuff or setting up cymbals or what. He says, why don't you do that for a while out front? Like, why don't you start with that and then we'll come in? And I'm like, and this is his jazz sensibility versus my arrangers. Like, we got to do this and let's plan this. And I said, so you're going to come in after like 4 bars or 8 bars? And he goes, oh, let's just see what happens. And they wound up me doing that out front for like a full 8 bars, and they came in. So the intro wound up being twice as long as I had intended.
But it didn't feel like that. It just felt like, man, you're just in that moment, and it was a wonderful entrance to the
song. That was very much his suggestion, and I really appreciated it. And then I was just what he was doing, the groove was, he just knocked it out of the park. And when we went back to mix, I was just sitting there enjoying so much what he was doing, and had the idea of I want to feature him, but he didn't take a drum solo on it. I just wanted to hear the groove. And so I said to Chris, the engineer and co-producer, which wasn't the plan, but he contributed so much to it. It was far more than just mixing and recording it. He was really creatively suggesting stuff. I said, could we fade out do a fade on it like we were planning, rather than just, because there was no like sharp, clean ending on the tune. We just grooved and let it go. Figured we fade it out later. And I said, what if we fade out the bass and drums, the bass and piano first, and then we can just let Herlin go for a while. And you want to hear, is that going to stand on its own? Is that going to sound good? And as soon as we muted the bass and drums the bass and piano to have a listen, it was like, oh yeah, I'd listen to this for like 5 minutes. So we fade out the 2 instruments, and then he goes on for another 20 seconds before the drums start to fade out. And it's one of my favorite things on the album. And it's not something I did not go in there planning it. And I plan a lot of stuff. And this is true of graphics as well. I'll have something like completely pictured out in my head and laid out. And sometimes it's hard to get me to change direction and talk me into doing something different, because I get these preconceived notions and I'm allergic to change. And that one, the intro and the ending are completely different things than I went in there thinking they were going to be. So,
that's lovely.
But and that's I think that's part of it's in the water in New Orleans. It's just let's see what happens. The spontaneity. I think they cook that way too. It's a different mentality, and it's very cool.
Yeah. So also just a quick shout out. I'm really delighted that you included Time in a Bottle, which is one of my favorite songs of all time.
That's amazing.
I absolutely adore that song. I'm sitting there minding my business, listening to the album, and that one pops in, and it's a very emotional song, but it's a very, I think you have this ability to take something that might feel melancholy, and the original is very much like that to me, and there is levity coming out of your renditions of these, and for one, I just want to applaud you for that, because it just makes the song richer. It really brings the true nature of the song. But can you share a bit about, for instance, in Time in a Bottle, how you go about finding your own version of that?
I'm always wary of being respectful to the original. I never want anything to be, I don't like doing anything where it sounds like I'm poking fun at the tune. And I guess we could get to my version of Every Breath You Take. But I that particular tune, I've been listening to that song for so long that it was easy because it's very heartfelt. One thing I didn't know until recently was the timing of when he wrote it. And I probably should have known this, but his son, AJ Crochet, I'm never sure if I'm pronouncing it right, Crochet?
Crochet? Yeah.
Crochet. But Jim's son, AJ, performs still, and he's a great performer. And I saw a video of him doing the tune and explaining that his dad, Jim, wrote the tune in response to finding out that his wife was pregnant with AJ. And so that puts a different take on it. And even now, I think about it differently than when I recorded it. I also didn't know that this was going to happen. That song was the one that debuted on the radio, I think last Tuesday. And I was kind of excited. I mean, I've had albums on the radio before, but this was a first with the singing. And it was Tuesday night and we listened to it, and and then the next day I read that day, the Wednesday, is the 50th anniversary of Jim's passing.
Oh, wow.
He died. Yeah. Didn't have a lot of albums, had just a couple records, 3 at most. I think it might've been 2.
Yeah.
And they were taking off from a small airport in Louisiana to go from one college gig to go play another college in Texas. And the pilot clipped some trees near the runway and the plane went down. Nobody survived. And so that was a posthumous, top 10 hit.
Yeah.
There's a lot to it. I have a lot of, when I think about the story behind the tunes, a lot of mixed feelings. But for me, as far as the song goes, I just grew up with it being something that was in the record collection of my parents' friends. Saturday morning was folk choir rehearsal at the church, and Sunday morning was folk choir service at the church. And then we would go to some member would always, let's go back to my house this week, and the coffee and day-old donuts and usually wound up with me, going through their record collection, curious what they were listening to. And the Jim Crochet album was, with that on it, was in somebody's. I don't remember whose exactly, but that's how I discovered an awful lot of music all over the map, from Jethro Tull to AC/DC to acoustic stuff like Jim Crochet and Paul Williams' songwriting for the Carpenters. That song, I'm also puzzled by Wet Story is the precise one, but Jim talked like he was writing it for his wife because he was pregnant. But AJ, when he was playing it live, was talking about how his dad wrote it for him as opposed to because of him. And I'm like, oh, that depending which way you take it, that's a very different sentiment.
It adds completely different layers. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's, I sort of took it as, and I say this awkwardly because we're not romantic, we're not public display of affection people, but on the album I said, this tune is, this recording is for my wife, this particular tune. And then in brackets I added, but whatever, don't make it awkward. Like, cause we're so uncomfortable with that sort of stuff.
You gotta have the caveat.
Yeah. Like, don't be weird. It's just a song, it's not romantic.
Yeah. And I think you also, you did a wonderful job there, tying it all into a beautiful bow of personal meaning, I think. And I'm going to get as emotional as possible here, so I apologize. But
no, please.
When you get to Rainbow Connection at the end, which, as you've shared on the podcast before, that's a deeply, deeply personal song. And I'd like you to share that story again for people who are joining us for the first time, because it is so moving. And maybe if you could elaborate a little bit more on the new context, given that you sing it now, as opposed to the previous releases that you shared, which are instrumental.
Yeah, I did it on 2013 Songs My Daughter Knows to close the album. And it also closes this album. And I was hesitant. I'm like, oh, that'd be weird. And I'm like, no, it kind of, maybe that's my thing. Maybe I close every album with some version of this. I saw the Muppet movie in the theater. Yeah, I want to say 1979 it came out. It should have been Song of the Year at the Oscars, but it was beaten out by Melissa Manchester's song from the Sally Field, the Union movie, Solidarity. It's escaping me, forgive me. But in reality, it probably should have been The Rose, this by Bette Midler, except that they, forgive me if I told you this already. It has to be the song has to have not just been original to the movie. It has to have been written for the movie. Like they commissioned the song for the movie. And that songwriter, I want to say Amanda McBroom, they called her, the Oscar people, and said, so yeah, this movie, and she goes, this was written for the movie, eh? And she goes, well, I had already written it, but I hadn't done anything with it. So I said, yeah, you can use it for the movie. And they're like, oh no, that doesn't count. You have to have written it deliberately for the movie. So in being not knowing this, and maybe she would have been painfully honest regardless, it didn't qualify for an Oscar. And that song was huge. But Rainbow Connection was the big one for me. It opens the Muppet movie, a magnificent close-up pulling into Kermit. And the song is followed by an appearance by Dom DeLuise doing some of the funniest material I've ever seen on screen. When he shows up in a rowboat and encourages Kermit to go to Hollywood, and setting up the whole movie. And then I also saw it in French shortly thereafter, because that's the summer I did a French exchange program where an English-speaking kid from Ontario goes to Montreal and stays with a French-speaking family and vice versa. And we went and saw that movie in the theater. And I assume Kermit sang the lyrics in French as well, although I don't actually recall. And then I had the 45, which went missing for years. And then my brother gave me, I'm not sure if it's the same one. He thinks it might be. It might have just got lost in our records for years. As a birthday present a week ago, he found the 45. So it's in a place of honor in our home now. And the lyrics are just stunning. And Paul Williams, who wrote tunes for the Carpenters and was Phantom of the Paradise, who was in the movie. He wrote these gorgeous lyrics. Kenny Asher wrote the music. Kenny did some arranging for John Lennon at one point, did a lot of movie music. He still plays at Birdland on Fridays in New York with the big band every week. I don't think he has to, but he does. And I have pictures of a 5-year-old Lenny, who's now 13, sitting on the piano bench with him at Birdland. I wasn't there for that trip, but I just love those photos to death.
It's amazing.
And so I wound up, it was the first song I ever played for her. Literally, when we got home from the hospital with Lenny, she was a couple of days old, went right to the piano and had her on my lap and played Rainbow Connection. And I don't know what I thought was going to happen. I usually say that, I thought the skies were going to open and heavenly lights were going to shine on us, and she'd look up at me and gaze at me, but she just sat there and drooled. But it wound up being an absolute favorite of hers. And so I closed that instrumental record when she was 2.5 with it. And since I've seen a lot of videos, I did a deep dives on Paul Williams talking about the song, and Paul Williams sings it differently. And I used to think, oh, he's taking liberties with that. That's not how it goes. It's like, wait a minute. Him and Kenny wrote the tune. It's possible, and I would love to ask him sometime, the way you sing it now and the way you phrase it, is that how you did it for Jim Henson? And then maybe Henson went, oh, well, Kermit would sing it much more simply. And so maybe it was Jim Henson taking some liberties with what Paul Williams and Kenny Asher wrote to simplify it for that character. I don't know. But I've incorporated since then, some of how Paul Williams phrases things, and then some things of my own as well. And the arrangement is different than how I did it before, which is pretty true to the original. I add another section at the end, right where you think it's about to end, where it would end, and go off on another bit of a solo briefly, and then before it starts winding down. And I also approach it differently now after hearing Williams discuss the lyric. And why are there so many songs about rainbows? And what's on the other side? Rainbows are visions, but only illusions, and rainbows have nothing to hide. So we've been told. And hearing him talk about how they wanted to paint themselves in the corner and go, wait a minute, it's not that simple. And that's not entirely accurate. And now when I think about that, every time I sing it, it's like the opening statement isn't the whole tune. It's like the opening statement. And then the singer immediately says, the lyricist immediately says, so we've been told, but hang on a minute. And we choose to believe it. I know they're wrong. Wait and see. It's, whoa, that's like, it's, and this is something I should have been doing all along, but being new to singing. But when I was an accompanist at colleges for musical theater, my friend Louisa, who was also my first voice teacher, and said, get over here, let me give you a lesson. You're talking about learning to sing. You were talking about this when you were 40. Now you're turning 50. I'm not going to listen to you talking about this when you're 60. Come over right now and have a lesson. And that's sort of how it started. Louisa was the voice teacher at the music theater program at the college, and she would have them do a lyric analysis, like write out the lyrics double spaced, and then write in the spaces between them what you think that line is about. And that figures heavily into music theater because you're supposed to still be acting while you're singing, and you would do that for dialogue. So why wouldn't you do it for lyrics? And now I very much do that with lyrics. And I've had people comment on a friend named Harvey who knows more about jazz standards than he's forgotten more than I'll ever know. And he commented on after a particular set I was doing and said you're really like acting the lyrics. And I didn't even realize I was doing it, but I guess my facial expression was telegraphing something about one of the lines, and it connected with him, which really meant a lot to me, especially knowing as much as he knows about this stuff. So singing, finally getting to sing Rainbow Connection on a recording, that was again for this particular album, that's probably one of the that's the biggest box I get to check.
Oh,
I think.
Beautiful.
It was my absolute favorite pop song of all time. I get to close a record where I can actually sing these amazing lyrics.
Oh, yeah. And it's a worthy conclusion to the album, I think, across the board. You've done such a wonderful job of not reinventing, but just doing a couple of refreshers in a lot of these tracks. And it reminds us of how beautiful they were to begin with and shining a new light on them, which I thought was such a great accomplishment with the vocals included. But I have one more. To be mindful of your time and to gain some insight. I think maybe what we should do is if you and I like kind of sit down and do a fundraiser together of some kind, like then we could go telethon style because you have so many wonderful stories. You have so much to share that it's such a blast to just listen and take it all in. But this one here, not to tie it back to the AI thing or anything, but mostly I'm curious of the human element and its place in our society right now. In particular, jazz, a genre or maybe a musical approach that some might consider not at the forefront of pop culture. Why do we need it? What is the sort of I keep saying joy, but perhaps the enriching quality of jazz that is important to share, especially when talking about this new album, Look Out, and across the board about the genre. What is it giving us right now, and how can it benefit us?
Man, I've got such strong feelings about some of what you asked that as far as what it brings, there's so many different approaches to jazz and so many different styles that I can't answer for probably 90% of people who play it. Being me, this will be a little bit tangential, but I think in performing in general, I've come to realize something that I didn't when I was younger, and that is that we're not just performing We're not performing necessarily to educate anybody, to get maybe they might want to dance, was something I used to be uptight about. Like, I thought it was people were making fun a bit if they walked by and started dancing a little bit to the music. And now that I sort of fancy myself not just like an instrumentalist or a jazz musician, but an entertainer, and I'm shocked at how much I'm enjoying that. I think that what are the most important thing that we do is we're making memories for folks. And now I look at an audience at a gig, and that's how I approach it. And if they went to the trouble to maybe find a babysitter, to find parking, to plunk down some money for drinks, maybe pay for a ticket, and invest their time in this. And I think my job is for them to leave with a good memory of that day, of that evening. I've looked in an audience at a gig that wasn't mine, this Christmas fundraiser we do every year in outside of Toronto for Kids Ability, a really great cause. That actually, they do speech therapy as well, so it's a little bit personal for me. And saw some of the youngest folks and some of the oldest folks I've ever seen at an audience, in the audience at a show. And for the kids, it might be the first time they've ever seen live music. That's a heck of a memory. I remember my experiences with that very clearly. And for the old folk, I mean, we're talking folks that are old enough that I wonder, might this be the last time that their family takes them out to see entertainment? And that's a large part of the audience for this, what we're doing for these shows. That's a huge memory. And man, it makes you want to do a good job and deliver something that's worthy of being in that memory. More specific to jazz, I find it such fun, and that's not true. I don't know if I'm positive that's not universal, because there's so many different approaches to it. But I can only take myself so seriously. It's like I said to Ricky, the fellow who wrote the liner notes, and I was honored to have him do it. I mean, this guy won the Grammy Award for writing liner notes in 2022. And I was shocked that he was so pleased to do these. But I said, if I'm going to have liner notes, and I wasn't sure I was going to, in the booklet, if I'm going to have them, I need somebody with a sense of humor, because I do the theme from Spider-Man, for God's sake. Like, it's like, no one's going to listen to this with a serious face, scratching their beard and pondering the meaning of art. I'm having fun. And I need there to be a sense of fun and hopefully some joy, because of what I get out of it. And it's bizarre to me sometimes how much I value getting a laugh between songs at a performance, that I really wonder, am I prioritizing the right things? Because it's so gratifying to me. The part of, if you notice, there's a lot of relatively contemporary music on the album. And I've always been puzzled. Well, I think I know the reason, but I've always wished that the repertoire for jazz had moved chronologically not the way anything, because it didn't really happen. Let me explain. When jazz started happening, they were improvising on popular music of the day. So folks were hearing people play that hit, like a song from, that new Broadway show, that big hit, Blue Skies. These guys are improvising on Blue Skies. I know that song, but it's 2023 and I still do Blue Skies. I mean, I love the tune, but we're not drawing on the songs of today. And I don't know that non-jazz audiences connect with it the same way. Herbie Hancock did an album in the 90s called The New Standard, some wordplay there for jazz standards. And he did a Prince tune, he did a Don Henley tune, did a Beatles tune. And I thought, this is maybe he's going to get this kick-started, that we're going to start playing, and it didn't really happen. It wasn't one of his more successful albums. I think part of the reason is that the songs when jazz started tended to be 32 bar AABA. It's like with poetry. The structure is 32 bars AABA. And if you play it, if I say let's play Blue Skies, the only question is really what key, and then you count it off, and there's the tempo because it's going to be this AABA song structure. But if you say, hey, let's do I'm trying to what's a Norah Jones, Don't Know Why, is something that jazz musicians sometimes play, not as much as the other songs, but you can say, hey, let's do Don't Know Why by Norah Jones. There still has to be some discussion as to what are you going to improvise on, because there's a verse, chorus, verse, chorus, and I think the second verse or the second chorus is a little bit longer than the first one, so there's an inconsistency, and then there's a bridge. So are we gonna solo on just the verse? Are we gonna do the verse chorus? Are you gonna do the entire song? It's not as simple as calling a tune, like Blue Skies. So I think once that pop song structure started to happen, especially with when rock music stopped just being a 12-bar blues. I'm paraphrasing a lot of this history, but and the song structure got more complex. It wasn't as simple as a jazz musician saying, "Hey, let's do this tune." Everyone knows basically what to do, and that's when I think the jazz canon, the repertoire of what is a jazz standard, sort of got frozen at that point. So it was the music from the beginning of jazz until roughly 1960, maybe. That's when it stopped. Stuff stopped being as simple as, "Hey, let's play that song we heard the other day on the radio, that great new tune. Let's play it, but like as a jazz tune." And so I love finding songs that I can interpret through this lens. Like "You Can Call Me Al" by Paul Simon, but I'm always looking for something I can do with it other than just play it with a swing beat. And in that case, I thought, let's take I think I was playing the horn shots. I always loved hearing my brother play this when he would play acoustic guitar and sing. Well, what happens if we play it over the relative minor? All of a sudden it's and then you change the feel, and that's basically my version. And
Beautiful.
It's funny to watch the audience go, "Oh, I know this. Why do I know this?" And until I get to the chorus and then there's some revelation. Some people go, "Oh," when they hear "You Can Be My Body." I'm not singing the right key. But when you can be my bodyguard, I can be your long lost pal. Some people go, "Oh," and there's still other people, because it's such a different tone and vibe and feel, that the "oh" of revelation doesn't happen until I actually say, "You Can Call Me Al." So it's fun that way, but it's other tunes like "Time in a Bottle" you mentioned aren't as different, but I like reharmonizing them a bit. So with the tune is the chorus is. You can there a lot of jazz progressions, common chord progressions in jazz figure into this. This part is, I think, in his version, that descending line, but it's also it immediately makes me think of "My Funny Valentine, Sweet Dada." Because there's only so many chord progressions.
Sure.
And then when it goes major for the chorus, "There never seems to be enough time." Well, it's is also, and I quote it pretty much verbatim after the last chorus.
Yeah. Billy Joel has to
I call them
make an appearance.
Piano Man chords. Or "Can you hear the people sing da 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 da" Les Mis. But I don't think I play that in there, but I throw in a little bit of Piano Man. It's and then finding for improvising, I play piano in such a way, if I'm playing jazz, that more chords means there's more things I can do. So finding extra chords to stick between the chords that are in the original version is a lot of fun for me. So
beautiful.
And then sometimes if it's just a blues, it's just a blues. So the song "Big Wide World" is a PBS Kids theme song that my daughter absolutely loved, and my wife actually worked with the creator when she was in animation production. But it's a 12-bar blues. It's not even a jazzified 12-bar blues. It's an old school 12-bar blues, the way you would play it, 80 years ago on acoustic guitar. So I messed with the feel a bit, but it's still, I wasn't gonna mess with the chord changes too much on that one. So that one's pretty traditional.
Oh, beautiful. Well, Jim, this has been an absolute pleasure. I know we keep running out of time on these because you have such phenomenal stories, but I hope you stick around here for a minute because I want to talk to you for a sec after we wrap up. But I want to thank you so much for bringing Look Out, your new album, out into the world. It is such a pleasure to listen to you take on these songs and giving them your own spin, make something that is truly memorable, and very emotional experience listening to them. I really enjoyed it. And also
that's nice to hear.
Yeah, and also for these remarkable insights. I just have such a blast listening to you put together a lot of this musical perspective that you've acquired over the years and refine the way that you want to go about making your art. And yes, you're an entertainer, but you're also a damn good artist, and it's such a pleasure to have you here and to chat with you.
Oh, thanks, man.
Yeah. But I hope, hey, round 3, maybe down the around the corner.
I'll get some new anecdotes too.
These are golden.
Oh, do you want some accent music again?
Yeah. Are we doing the outro? Let's go.